Yeah.
To the human world. But you can do something I didn't know was permanently. Not alone in Dead rise. It'll be the end of I once helped could enter the spirit world of the living. Gemma, listen to me. A family is different. You can bring demons back.
What is this?
Gemma, listen to me.
Is bringing back the terrifying world of The Further, and in today's video, we're diving deep into everything you need to know about this upcoming horror sequel. From its chilling premise to its connection with the previous films in the franchise, we're going to break down the complete story in a simple and engaging way so you don't miss a single detail. Not only that, but we'll also give you a full review of the movie, discussing its horror elements, performances, and overall impact to help you understand whether it truly lives up to the Insidious legacy or not. If you're someone who loves supernatural horror, or you've been following this franchise for years, then this video is going to be especially exciting for you. We'll also talk about one of the most important questions every viewer has. Should you watch this movie or skip it? By the end of this video, you'll have a clear idea about the film's strengths, weaknesses, and whether it's worth your time. So stay with us till the end, because things are about to get seriously creepy. Insidious, Out of the Further, begins with a dark and unsettling opening sequence that immediately connects us to the terrifying world of The Further. The film opens in complete silence, with slow camera movement inside an abandoned version of a house that looks familiar yet distorted, almost like a memory twisted by fear. Shadows move without bodies, whispers echo through empty halls, and suddenly we see a young woman trapped inside this dimension, desperately trying to escape. This sequence establishes one important idea. The Further is no longer just a place, it is evolving. We are then introduced to Gemma, a single mother living a quiet life with her young daughter in the same house where she grew up. At first, everything feels normal, but the film slowly builds tension through small, disturbing events. Objects move slightly out of place. Her daughter begins talking to someone invisible, and strange noises echo at night. Unlike typical horror films, the fear here builds psychologically rather than through jump scares. One night, Gemma experiences something terrifying. While sleeping, she feels herself drifting into another dimension. Instead of dreaming, she finds herself walking through a dark version of her own house. This is her first accidental visit to The Further, a mysterious purgatorial realm filled with lost souls and dangerous entities. At first, Gemma doesn't understand what is happening. She believes it's just a nightmare. But things take a darker turn when she wakes up and realizes Something from that realm has followed her back. A shadow figure briefly appears behind her daughter before vanishing. As the days pass, Gemma starts noticing a pattern. Every time she loses consciousness or sleeps deeply, she slips into the further. But unlike others before her, she discovers something far more dangerous. She doesn't just visit that world. Turning point of the film. Soon after, her daughter begins behaving strangely. She starts drawing disturbing images of shadow figures and a tall, faceless entity watching them. At the same time, unexplained physical events begin happening in the house. Doors slam violently, reflections move on their own, and whispers become louder. Gemma realizes that something has attached itself to her family. The tension rises when a paranormal investigator character, possibly connected to Elise's legacy, is introduced. Through this character, we learn that Gemma's ability is extremely rare and dangerous. In previous films, people could enter the further through astral projection, but bringing entities back into the real world breaks the natural boundary between life and death. And once that boundary is broken, it cannot easily be restored. We see the first major horror moment. During a night sequence, Gemma is pulled violently into the further again. This time she encounters a powerful entity, something far more intelligent and dangerous than anything seen before. It watches her silently, almost as if it has been waiting. And when she wakes up, it's no longer alone. The story of Insidious, Out of the Further, continues as the consequences of Gemma's ability begin to unfold in a far more terrifying way. After her last encounter inside the further, Gemma wakes up with a deep sense that something has changed, not just around her, but within her. The air in the house feels heavier, almost suffocating, and even daylight no longer brings comfort. Her daughter begins waking up at night, whispering to someone in the corner of her room, describing a tall man with no face who tells her secrets. What makes this even more disturbing is that the child speaks as if she isn't afraid, almost as if she's being slowly manipulated. Gemma tries to ignore it at first, convincing herself that it's just stress or imagination. But reality quickly proves otherwise. Objects in the house begin moving more aggressively. Now, chairs scrape across the floor on their own, mirrors crack without reason, and doors slam with violent force. One night, Gemma records strange noises on her phone, only to later discover distorted voices in the playback, whispering her name from somewhere beyond. This is when she realizes the horrifying truth. The entities she encountered in the further are no longer just following her, they are crossing over. At the same time, the film introduces a deeper connection to the franchise's legacy through the return of Lin Shaye as Elise Rainier, but not in the way audiences expect. Instead of appearing physically, Elise manifests through recordings, visions, and fragments of past investigations. It's as if her knowledge is guiding Gemma from beyond, warning her that the barrier between worlds is collapsing. Through these fragments, we learn something crucial. The further was never meant to be accessed freely, and those who disturb it risk turning our world into an extension of it. As Gemma's understanding grows, so does the threat. The entity she encountered before begins to show itself more clearly. It appears first as a shadow, then as a distorted humanoid figure, and eventually as a towering presence that seems to bend reality around it. Unlike other spirits, this one does not simply haunt, it observes, studies, and waits. It begins to test its influence, manipulating small objects, then people, and finally entire environments. The horror intensifies when Gemma realizes that her daughter is becoming a target, not just because she is vulnerable, but because children are easier to influence from the further. The midpoint of this part delivers one of the film's most chilling sequences. During a stormy night, the house completely transforms. Lights flicker uncontrollably. Walls seem to stretch unnaturally. And for a brief moment, the entire house shifts into the further while the family is still inside it. This terrifying overlap of worlds confirms the worst possibility. The boundary is no longer stable. The further is bleeding into reality. Desperate for answers, Gemma revisits her childhood memories, and uncovers something shocking. As a child, she had already visited the Further once before, but the memory was suppressed. This explains her rare ability and also reveals a darker truth. Something from that time may have marked her, waiting for the moment she would return. Her power is not a gift. It is a doorway that was never fully closed. The danger reaches a new level. The entity finally makes direct contact, not through shadows or whispers, but face to face. It speaks without a voice, communicating directly into Gemma's mind, showing her visions of a world completely overtaken by darkness, cities consumed, people trapped between life and death, and creatures freely walking in the human world. The message is clear. This is only the beginning. And as Gemma tries to fight back, she realizes something even more terrifying. She is no longer just visiting the Further. She is becoming connected to it. The story of Insidious, Out of the Further, deepens as the fragile line between the living world and the Further begins to collapse in ways no one has ever experienced before. After the terrifying direct contact with the entity, Gemma is no longer able to deny what is happening. She is not just being haunted, she is becoming a bridge between two realities. The fear now is not only about survival, but about what she might unknowingly unleash if she loses control. In the days that follow, Gemma's physical and mental state begins to deteriorate. She experiences sudden blackouts where she cannot remember what she has done, only to wake up in different parts of the house with signs of disturbance around her. Furniture is overturned, doors are wide open, and sometimes she finds strange symbols drawn on walls, symbols she doesn't recognize but somehow feels connected to. These moments suggest something deeply disturbing. When she slips into the Further, her body may not be entirely her own anymore. Her daughter's condition worsens as well. The child, once innocent and unaware, now begins speaking in a calm but unnatural tone, describing places and people she has never seen. She talks about the dark halls, the red door that never closes, and the watchers who stand still but see everything. These descriptions echo elements familiar to long-time followers of the Insidious universe, but here they feel more personal and immediate. It becomes clear that the child is being slowly drawn toward the Further, not by force, but through manipulation and curiosity. Desperate to protect her daughter, Gemma seeks help by following the clues left behind through Elise Rainier's past investigations. Through old recordings, case notes, and fragmented visions of Lin Shaye's character, Gemma learns that the entities in the Further are not all the same. Some are lost souls, trapped and confused, while others are ancient, intelligent beings that thrive on fear and control. The entity targeting her belongs to the latter. It is not just a demon, but something far more calculated and patient. One of the most crucial revelations comes when Gemma discovers that the Further is not a single place, but a vast network of overlapping realities shaped by memory, trauma, and unresolved emotions. Every person who enters it leaves a trace behind, and over time, these traces form entire environments. This explains why Gemma keeps seeing distorted versions of her childhood home. It is a place deeply tied to her past, now twisted into something nightmarish. Determined to understand her connection, Gemma makes a dangerous decision. She will intentionally enter the Further while fully conscious. Unlike her previous accidental visits, this time she prepares herself, setting up cameras, recording devices, and safeguards to monitor her body while she is gone. The scene is tense and methodical, emphasizing the risk she is taking. As she closes her eyes and focuses, the world around her fades, and she once again steps into the dark, silent realm. This time, however, the Further feels different. It is more active, more aware of her presence. The shadows seem to move with purpose, and distant whispers grow louder as she walks deeper into the environment. She begins to encounter fragmented figures, souls that appear trapped in repeating moments of fear. Some try to reach out to her, while others avoid her entirely, as if they know she is being followed. As she moves further, Gemma comes across a haunting version of her childhood self. The young girl stands alone in a dimly lit hallway, crying softly. This encounter is both emotional and terrifying, as it reveals that Gemma's past trauma is deeply embedded in the further. When she approaches, the child suddenly stops crying and looks up, her expression shifting into something unnatural. In a chilling moment, the child whispers, "You were never supposed to come back." This encounter triggers a flood of suppressed memories. Gemma remembers a night from her childhood when she first entered the further unintentionally. She recalls being chased by a presence she couldn't see, hiding in corners, and eventually being pulled back into the real world by a force she never understood. That night, something had tried to take her, but failed. Now, years later, it has found her again. Meanwhile, in the real world, her daughter begins to experience a similar pull. The house grows colder, shadows linger longer, and time itself seems to behave strangely. Clocks stop working, reflections lag behind movement, and for brief moments, the child sees figures standing in doorways that disappear when approached. The tension builds as it becomes clear that the entity is expanding its influence beyond Gemma. Back in the further, Gemma finally encounters the entity in its true form. It no longer hides in shadows. It stands before her as a tall, distorted figure with elongated limbs and a face that constantly shifts, never settling into a single identity. Its presence feels overwhelming, almost suffocating, as if reality itself is bending around it. Unlike previous encounters, this one is direct and unavoidable. The entity does not attack immediately. Instead, it communicates through visions, forcing Gemma to witness horrifying possibilities. She sees entire families trapped between worlds, children lost in endless darkness, and entire spaces in the real world being consumed by the further. The message is clear. Her power has opened a door that cannot be easily closed, and the entity intends to use it to expand its reach. But the most disturbing revelation comes when the entity shows her a vision of herself standing in her own home, but with empty eyes, surrounded by shadow figures. This suggests a terrifying possibility. If she loses control, she could become a permanent vessel, allowing these entities to fully exist in the human world. Gemma tries to resist, focusing on her daughter and her determination to protect her. This emotional anchor gives her the strength to break free from the entity's control, but not without consequence. As she escapes, the environment around her begins to collapse, and she is violently pulled back into her body. When she wakes up, she realizes something is wrong immediately. The house is silent. Too silent. She calls out for her daughter, but there is no response. Panic sets in as she searches every room, only to find signs of disturbance. Doors open, windows shattered, and the child's drawings scattered across the floor. Then she sees it. One final drawing left in the center of the room, depicting a dark figure holding a small hand and a door wide open behind them. The realization hits her instantly. While she was in the further, something came out, and it didn't come alone. On this devastating note, shifting the story from a personal haunting into a full-scale supernatural crisis, Gemma is no longer just trying to survive. She is now racing against time to save her daughter and stop a growing invasion that threatens to consume both worlds. The story of Insidious Out of the Further takes a much darker and more intense turn as the consequences of Gemma's actions finally begin to unfold in the real world. After discovering that her daughter is missing, Gemma is thrown into a state of pure panic. The house, once her only safe space, now feels like a trap filled with unseen eyes watching her every move. The silence inside the home is unnatural, broken only by faint, distant whispers that seem to echo from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. It becomes immediately clear that this is no longer a simple haunting. This is something far more dangerous and widespread. Gemma begins searching frantically, calling her daughter's name, but instead of a response, she hears something else. A soft, distorted version of her daughter's voice comes from upstairs, repeating her name in a slow, unnatural tone. The moment she hears it, she freezes, realizing that whatever is calling her may not be her child at all. Despite her fear, her maternal instinct pushes her forward, and she slowly makes her way upstairs, each step heavier than the last. As she reaches the hallway, the environment subtly shifts. The walls seem darker, the air colder, and shadows stretch unnaturally along the floor. For a brief moment, it feels like she is standing between two worlds again. When she finally enters her daughter's room, she finds it empty, but not untouched. The walls are now covered in drawings, hundreds of them, far more than before. Each drawing depicts the same horrifying scene. A tall, faceless figure standing beside a small child, with a door behind them leading into darkness. Some drawings show the figure holding the child's hand, while others show the child standing alone in front of the open door, as if being invited to step inside. These images confirm Gemma's worst fear. Her daughter is being taken deeper into the further, not physically yet, but mentally and spiritually. As Gemma tries to process what is happening, the atmosphere suddenly changes. The door behind her slams shut with violent force, trapping her inside the room. The temperature drops instantly, and her breath becomes visible in the cold air. Then, slowly, the closet door creaks open on its own. From the darkness inside, a shadow begins to form. Not just a simple shape, but something with presence and intent. It steps forward, revealing itself as one of the entities that crossed over during Gemma's last visit to the Further. This moment marks a crucial shift in the film. For the first time, the entities are no longer confined to subtle disturbances. They are physically manifesting in the real world. The shadow creature moves unnaturally, its limbs bending in impossible ways, and its face remains hidden as if it does not need one. It does not attack immediately. Instead, it studies Gemma, tilting its head slightly, almost curiously, as if trying to understand her. This behavior is far more unsettling than a direct attack, because it suggests intelligence and intention. Gemma, terrified but determined, tries to escape, but the entity blocks her path. Just as it begins to move closer, the room suddenly shifts again, flickering between reality and the Further. In one blink, she is in her daughter's room. In the next, she is standing in the decayed, shadow-filled version of the same space. This overlapping of dimensions confirms that the barrier is not just weakening, it is breaking entirely. Meanwhile, outside the house, strange events begin to occur in the surrounding neighborhood. Lights flicker in nearby homes, people report hearing voices, and shadows appear in places where they shouldn't exist. The influence of the Further is spreading beyond Gemma's home, turning what was once a personal nightmare into a larger threat. This expansion raises the stakes dramatically, suggesting that if nothing is done, the entire area could become consumed by these supernatural forces. Back inside, Gemma manages to break free from the entity's immediate presence and escapes the room. But a danger follows her. As she moves through the house, she begins to notice something horrifying. Reflections no longer match reality. In mirrors and windows, she sees figures standing behind her that are not actually there. Sometimes she even sees herself, but with a blank expression and hollow eyes, standing completely still while her real body moves. This visual distortion hints at a deeper connection forming between her and the Further. In her desperation, Gemma turns again to the guidance left behind by Lin Shaye's character, Elise Rainier. Through a final recorded message, she discovers, Elise warns that once an entity gains enough presence in the real world, it can begin to possess not just bodies, but spaces, memories, and even identities. The concept of possession here is expanded beyond the traditional idea. It becomes something far more invasive and irreversible. As night falls, the film builds toward another major turning point. Gemma finally encounters her daughter again, but something is wrong. The child is standing at the end of a dark hallway, completely still, facing away from her. When Gemma calls out, the child slowly turns around, revealing an expression that is both familiar and disturbingly empty. Her eyes seem darker, deeper, as if something else is looking out from within. At first, the child says nothing. Then, in a voice that is clearly not her own, she speaks a single sentence. You opened the door, and now we can stay. This moment confirms the worst possible outcome. Possession has begun. Gemma rushes toward her daughter, but before she can reach her, the lights go out completely. In the darkness, whispers fill the space, overlapping and echoing as if multiple entities are speaking at once. When the lights flicker back on, the child is gone again, leaving Gemma alone in a house that is no longer just haunted, it is occupied. With Gemma realizing a terrifying truth, she is no longer just fighting to save her daughter, she is fighting to stop an entire world from being taken over. And the longer the door remains open, the stronger they become. The story of Insidious, Out of the Further, now enters its most intense and emotionally driven phase, where fear is no longer just about survival, it becomes a desperate fight against time, possession, and the complete collapse of reality itself. After the horrifying encounter with her daughter, Gemma is left shaken to her core. But one thing is now painfully clear. The child she saw is no longer entirely her own. Something from the further has found a way inside her, using her innocence as a gateway to fully anchor itself in the human world. As the night deepens, the house begins to transform more aggressively than ever before. The walls seem to breathe, expanding and contracting slowly as if alive. The sound design becomes overwhelming. Whispers, distant screams, and heavy footsteps echo constantly, never allowing a moment of silence. Gemma tries to leave the house, but every door she opens leads her back inside. Windows reveal only darkness instead of the outside world, as if the house itself has been pulled partially into the further. This confirms a terrifying possibility. The location has become a permanent crossing point between both realms. Gemma realizes she cannot run anymore. She must fight. Desperate for guidance, she pieces together everything she has learned. From the fragments of Elise Rainier's past cases, Lin Shaye's character had once explained that entities in the further rely on emotional anchors, fear, guilt, trauma, to strengthen their hold on the living. If Gemma wants to save her daughter, she must not only confront the entities, but also confront her own past, the very thing that ties her to this dark dimension. Determined, Gemma prepares herself for another journey into the further, but this time with a clear purpose. She will find the entity controlling her daughter and sever its connection. Before she begins, she records a message for herself, knowing there is a risk she may not return as the same person. This quiet, emotional moment contrasts heavily with the chaos around her, showing her strength as a mother willing to sacrifice everything. As she closes her eyes and focuses, the transition into the further is more violent than before. Instead of drifting, she is pulled forcefully, as if something is dragging her into the darkness. When she arrives, the environment is no longer just a distorted version of her home. It has expanded into a vast, nightmarish landscape. Endless hallways stretch in every direction. Doors appear and disappear, and shadows move independently, watching her from every corner. What makes this sequence especially terrifying is the sense that the further is now aware of her. It reacts to her presence, shifting constantly to confuse and isolate her. The usual silence is replaced with distant murmurs that seem to call her name, trying to lure her deeper into traps. As she moves forward, Gemma begins encountering trapped souls, figures frozen in moments of fear. Some reach out to her, silently begging for help, while others turn away as if ashamed or broken. These encounters highlight a deeper tragedy of the further. It is not just a place of monsters, but a prison for the lost. However, Gemma cannot afford to stop. She knows that every second she spends here gives the entities more time to strengthen their hold in the real world. Eventually, she reaches a massive, dark corridor unlike anything she has seen before. At the end of it stands a door, taller, heavier, and more ominous than any other. This door feels different. It radiates a presence that is both ancient and powerful, and Gemma instinctively knows that this is where the entity resides, the one that has taken control of her daughter. Before she can approach, the entity appears again. This time, it is no longer distant or observing. It stands directly in her path, fully formed and impossibly large, its body shifting between shapes as if it cannot decide on a single form. Its presence alone distorts the space around it, bending reality like a reflection in broken glass. Unlike previous encounters, it speaks clearly now, its voice layered and unnatural, as if multiple beings are speaking at once. It tells her something that shakes her completely. She was never chosen by accident. According to the entity, Gemma's connection to the further was established during her childhood, not as a mistake, but as part of a larger design. She was marked as a bridge, someone capable of opening doors that others could not. The entity reveals that it has been waiting for her to return, guiding her unknowingly through subtle influences, ensuring that she would one day unlock the barrier completely. This revelation changes everything. Gemma realizes that her entire journey may have been manipulated from the very beginning. The entity then shows her a horrifying vision of the real world. Streets are empty, buildings are dark, and shadow figures roam freely. Among abandoned spaces, people are trapped in a half-existence, neither alive nor dead, wandering endlessly as the influence of the further consumes everything. It is not just a threat, it is a future that is already beginning. But the most painful moment comes when the entity shows her daughter, standing calmly beside it, no longer resisting. The child looks peaceful, almost content, as if she has accepted this new reality. This emotional manipulation is meant to break Gemma's will, to make her believe that fighting is pointless. For a moment, Gemma almost gives in. The fear, guilt, and exhaustion weigh heavily on her, threatening to overwhelm her completely. But then she remembers something important. Not fear, but love. Her bond with her daughter becomes her anchor, stronger than any manipulation the entity can create. With this renewed strength, Gemma confronts the entity directly. Instead of running, she moves forward, forcing herself to face it. This act of defiance disrupts the entity's control, causing the environment to shake violently. The shadows around them begin to break apart, and for the first time, the entity reacts not with calm observation, but with anger. The confrontation escalates into a psychological battle rather than a physical one. The entity tries to trap her in illusions, showing her worst fears, her past failures, and the possibility of losing her daughter forever. But Gemma refuses to accept these visions as reality. She pushes through them, focusing only on her goal. Meanwhile, in the real world, the situation continues to worsen. The house is no longer the only place affected. The influence of the further begins spreading outward, affecting nearby homes and people. Lights go out across entire streets, emergency calls flood in, and reports of strange figures and unexplained events begin to surface. The supernatural is no longer hidden, it is becoming visible to everyone. Back in the further, Gemma finally reaches the massive door. The entity tries one last time to stop her, warning that opening it will unleash something even worse, something beyond its own control. This creates a moment of doubt. What if the entity is telling the truth? What if there is something even more dangerous behind that door? But Gemma realizes that she has no other choice. If this door is the source of the entity's power, then it must be confronted. With all her strength, she reaches for the handle. As soon as she touches it, the entire realm reacts violently. The ground trembles, shadows scream, and the entity lets out a horrifying roar, revealing its true form, something far more monstrous and incomprehensible than before. Its body expands, its shape becoming chaotic and unstable, as if it is losing control. Gemma pulls the door open. What she sees on the other side is not darkness, but something far worse. A deeper layer of the further. A place where even the entities fear to go. Raising the stakes to their highest point yet, Gemma has not just challenged the entity. She has uncovered something far more ancient and dangerous. Something that could change everything. And now there is no turning back. The story of Insidious, Out of the Further, now descends into its most disturbing and revealing chapter, as Gemma steps beyond the threshold of the massive door she has opened. What lies ahead is not just another layer of the further, but something far older, deeper and more unnatural, a place that feels less like a dimension and more like the origin of all darkness within the Insidious universe. The moment she crosses over, the environment changes completely. The endless corridors and fragmented memories of the further disappear, replaced by a vast, silent void filled with faint, flickering shapes that resemble distant memories or dying souls. There are no walls, no clear paths, only an infinite expanse where time and space feel meaningless. Gemma immediately senses that this place is different. It does not react to her presence in the same way the further does. There are no whispers calling her name, no shifting shadows trying to confuse her. Instead, there is an overwhelming stillness, as if everything here is watching but choosing not to move. The silence is more terrifying than anything she has experienced before, because it suggests a level of control far beyond the chaotic nature of the entities she has encountered so far. As she moves forward, faint figures begin to appear in the distance. Unlike the trapped souls in the further, these forms are barely visible, almost like echoes rather than beings. They flicker in and out of existence, repeating fragmented motions as if they are stuck in the earliest moments of their creation. Gemma begins to understand that this place may not be a prison for souls, it may be where they first become lost. The idea that this realm could be the origin point of the further itself adds a new layer of horror to the story, suggesting that everything she has seen until now is only a surface-level manifestation of something much deeper. While exploring, Gemma begins to experience visions that are not entirely her own. She sees flashes of different times, different people, and different tragedies, moments where individuals first encountered the further. These visions feel connected, as if they are all part of a larger pattern. Slowly, a horrifying realization forms. This place feeds on human emotion, especially fear and trauma, using them to create and sustain the entities that haunt the living world. In one particularly disturbing vision, Gemma sees her younger self again, but this time from a different perspective. She watches as a child version of herself unknowingly opens a small doorway into the further, allowing a faint shadow to slip through before it is forced back. This confirms what the entity had told her earlier. Her connection to this world was never accidental. She was exposed to it at a young age, and something within her has always been tied to this darkness. As Gemma tries to process these revelations, the environment begins to shift slightly. The stillness breaks, and the faint figures around her start to move in unison, slowly turning toward her. Unlike the aggressive entities from before, these movements are calm, almost ritualistic. It feels as if they are acknowledging her presence, recognizing her as something important. Then, from the distance, a new presence emerges. This presence is unlike anything Gemma has encountered before. It does not rush toward her or attempt to intimidate her. Instead, it approaches slowly, its form constantly shifting between something human, something completely abstract. It has no clear face, but its presence is overwhelming, carrying a sense of authority that even the previous entity lacked. When it finally stands before her, Gemma feels an intense pressure in her mind, as if this being is communicating directly with her thoughts. Unlike the other entity, this one does not rely on fear alone. It speaks with clarity and purpose. It reveals something that changes everything. The entity that has been chasing Gemma and possessing her daughter is not the true source of the threat. It is only a fragment, a creation born from this deeper realm. The being before her explains that the further is not a single entity or force, but a system, a constantly evolving network fueled by human consciousness. Fear, grief, anger, and guilt all contribute to its growth, shaping the entities that exist within it. This deeper realm, however, is where those emotions first take form. It is where raw human experience is transformed into something else, something that can exist independently of the living. The revelation is terrifying because it means that the horror cannot simply be destroyed. It is tied to humanity itself. Gemma demands to know why she was chosen, why she was given the ability to move between worlds. The being responds with a chilling truth. She was not chosen to stop this cycle. She was meant to expand it. Her ability to bring entities into the real world is not a mistake or an accident. It is a natural progression of this system, a way for the further to evolve beyond its limitations. This realization shakes Gemma deeply. Everything she has done so far, every attempt to understand and control her power, may have only helped strengthen the connection between worlds. But despite this overwhelming truth, Gemma refuses to accept it as her fate. She argues that if her power can open the door, it can also close it. This defiance creates a moment of tension, as the being seems to consider her response carefully. For the first time, the environment reacts directly to her will. The void around her begins to ripple, and the faint figures pause in their movements. This suggests that her connection to this realm is stronger than she realized, not just as a doorway, but as someone capable of influencing it. Sensing this, the being offers her a choice. She can embrace her role, allowing the further to fully merge with the human world, bringing an end to the separation between life and death. In this scenario, her daughter would not suffer. She would become part of something larger, something beyond fear and pain. Or she can fight against it, attempting to close the door she has opened. But doing so would require a sacrifice, something that would permanently sever her connection to both worlds. Gemma immediately understands what that means. To stop the spread of the further, she may have to give up her ability entirely, or even her life. This choice becomes the emotional core of the story, shifting the conflict from external horror to an internal struggle. Gemma is no longer just fighting monsters. She is confronting the very nature of her existence and what she is willing to sacrifice for her daughter. Before she can decide, the situation escalates rapidly. Back in the real world, the entity that has been controlling her daughter begins to lose stability. The connection between realms has grown too strong, and the boundaries are collapsing completely. Entire sections of the neighborhood are now overlapping with the further, creating a chaotic environment where people are trapped between dimensions. Gemma begins to feel this instability even within the deeper realm. The void starts to fracture, and the presence before her becomes less stable. Its form flickering unpredictably. It becomes clear that her actions have triggered something irreversible. Realizing that time is running out, Gemma makes her decision. She chooses to fight. Rejecting the being's offer, she focuses all her strength on returning to the real world, determined to save her daughter and close the door once and for all. This act of resistance causes a violent reaction within the realm. The faint figures scatter, the void collapses inward, and the being lets out a low, distorted sound, not quite anger, but something closer to disappointment. As the realm begins to break apart, Gemma is pulled back violently, once again losing control of her movement between worlds. When she awakens, she is no longer in the same place. The house has changed completely. It is now fully merged with the further. The walls are decayed. The air is thick with darkness, and shadow figures move freely throughout the space. This is no longer a partial overlap. It is a complete fusion of realities, and somewhere within this nightmare, her daughter is waiting. With this overwhelming shift, setting the stage for the final confrontation, the battle is no longer about preventing the invasion. It has already begun. Now, Gemma must face the consequences of everything she has uncovered and make the ultimate sacrifice if she hopes to stop what she has unleashed. The story of Insidious, Out of the Further, now moves into its most chaotic and emotionally charged phase as Gemma returns from the deeper realm, only to find that reality has completely collapsed into something unrecognizable. The house she once knew is no longer just partially affected. It has become a full extension of the further. Every wall is decayed, every hallway stretches unnaturally, and every shadow feels alive. There is no longer a clear distinction between the living world and the purgatorial dimension. It is as if the two have fused into a single unstable environment. Gemma slowly rises, disoriented and shaken, but the urgency of her mission quickly takes over. She calls out for her daughter, her voice echoing through the distorted corridors, but instead of a response, she hears multiple versions of her own voice repeating the same call from different directions. This disorienting effect makes it nearly impossible to determine what is real and what is an illusion. The environment is no longer just threatening. It is actively trying to confuse and trap her. As she begins to move through the house, she notices that the structure is constantly shifting. Hallways that once led to familiar rooms now open into endless darkness, while doors appear and disappear without warning. At times, she catches glimpses of her old home, the way it used to look. But these moments are brief, quickly swallowed by the decayed, shadow-filled version that dominates the space. This constant fluctuation creates a sense that the house itself is fighting for control, caught between its original reality and the invading darkness of the further. While navigating this ever-changing maze, Gemma starts encountering more entities than ever before. Some are the same shadow figures she has seen before, moving silently and watching her from a distance. Others are new, stranger, more distorted, as if they have been newly formed from the merging of worlds. These entities do not always attack. Instead, many of them simply observe, their presence adding to the overwhelming tension. It becomes clear that they are not just random spirits, they are part of a larger system, reacting to the growing instability. At one point, Gemma enters what appears to be her living room, but it is frozen in a moment from the past. The furniture is intact, the lighting is normal, and for a brief second, everything feels safe again. She sees her daughter sitting on the couch, quietly drawing just like before everything began. Overcome with emotion, Gemma rushes toward her, calling her name. But the moment she gets close, the illusion breaks. The room decays instantly, the walls peeling away into darkness, and the child turns around slowly, not with relief, but with an expression that is completely empty. Her eyes are darker than before, and her voice, when she speaks, is layered with something unnatural. "You shouldn't have come back," the child says, echoing words Gemma heard earlier in the further. This confirms that the entity's control over her daughter has deepened significantly. The child is no longer just influenced, she is becoming a vessel, a living connection that allows the entity to fully manifest in this merged reality. Gemma tries to reach her emotionally, speaking to her as a mother, reminding her of their memories, their bond, and the life they shared. For a moment, there is a flicker of recognition in the child's eyes, suggesting that she is still in there, still fighting. But the entity quickly reasserts control, twisting the child's expression back into something cold and distant. Suddenly, the environment shifts again. The floor beneath them cracks, and the space around them transforms into a vast, open area within the further, a place Gemma has never seen before. It resembles a distorted version of a city, with broken structures, endless voids, and shadow figures moving like a silent population. This is not just a house anymore, it is a gateway to something much larger. The entity finally reveals itself fully, no longer hiding behind shadows or illusions. It appears as a towering, ever-changing figure, its form shifting between something humanoid and something entirely abstract. Its presence dominates the space, bending the environment around it. The child stands beside it, completely still, her small figure contrasting sharply with the massive, terrifying being. This is the moment of direct confrontation. The entity speaks, its voice echoing across the entire space, layered with countless tones that make it impossible to identify a single source. It tells Gemma that the process is already too far along to stop. The merging of worlds has begun, and soon there will be no distinction between life and death, between reality and the further. Humanity, it claims, will become part of a greater existence, one without boundaries, without separation. Gemma refuses to accept this. She knows that what the entity describes is not evolution, but destruction. Drawing on everything she has learned, she realizes that the entity's power is still tied to her connection. As long as she remains a bridge, the doorway will stay open. This leads her to a devastating conclusion. If she wants to stop the entity, she must sever that connection completely, even if it means losing a part of herself forever. But there is a complication. Her daughter is still linked to the entity. If Gemma simply closes the door, the child may be lost along with it, trapped in the further, or worse. This creates an impossible situation. She must find a way to separate her daughter from the entity before she can close the connection. Determined, Gemma steps forward, ignoring the overwhelming fear and pressure radiating from the entity. She focuses entirely on her daughter, calling out to her again, this time with more intensity and emotion. She reminds her of who she is, of their life together, of the love that connects them. This emotional approach begins to create cracks in the entity's control. The child reacts, her body trembling slightly, her expression flickering between the entity's influence and her true self. This internal struggle becomes visible, showing that the possession is not absolute. It is a battle happening within her. The entity senses this and reacts aggressively. For the first time, it attacks directly, sending waves of distorted energy toward Gemma. The environment around them collapses and reforms violently, creating obstacles and illusions meant to break her focus. But Gemma pushes through, driven by her determination to save her daughter. In a powerful moment, she reaches out and grabs her daughter's hand. This physical contact creates a surge of energy that disrupts the entity's hold. The child screams, not in fear, but in conflict, as the two forces within her begin to clash. For a brief moment, the entity loses its full control, and the child's true voice emerges. "Mom, help me," she whispers. This moment confirms that she can still be saved. But the entity is not defeated yet. It begins to draw power from the surrounding environment, pulling energy from the merged reality itself. The shadow figures around them start to move closer, forming a massive, shifting presence that strengthens the entity. The scale of the threat becomes clear. This is no longer just one being, but a force connected to the entire system of the further. Gemma realizes that she cannot win this battle through strength alone. She must act quickly and decisively. With her daughter still holding her hand, she prepares to make the ultimate move, one that could either save them both or destroy everything. This intense cliffhanger, with Gemma standing at the center of a collapsing reality, holding onto her daughter while facing an entity that has grown beyond anything she has encountered before. The final battle is about to begin, and the outcome will decide the fate of both worlds. The story of Insidious, Out of the Further, now reaches its most emotional phase, where every choice carries irreversible consequences. As Gemma stands in the collapsing, merged reality of her home and the further, holding tightly onto her daughter's hand, the intensity of the moment becomes overwhelming. The environment around them is breaking apart. Walls dissolve into darkness. The ground trembles beneath their feet, and shadow entities swirl like a storm, feeding the massive presence behind them. This is no longer just a confrontation. It is the final clash between connection and control, love and manipulation, life and something far beyond it. The towering entity, now stronger than ever, begins to change form rapidly, as if it is pulling power from every corner of the further. Its body expands in something almost impossible to comprehend. Faces flicker across its surface, voices overlap into a deafening chorus, and its presence bends the space around it into chaos. It is no longer just one being. It has become a collective manifestation of everything the further represents. Through the child, it speaks again, its voice calm yet terrifying, offering Gemma one final chance to surrender. It promises that if she stops resisting, her daughter will no longer suffer. They will both become part of something eternal, beyond fear, beyond pain. For a brief moment, the temptation is real. Gemma sees visions of a peaceful existence, her daughter smiling. No darkness, no fear, no loss. But deep inside, she understands the truth, that peace is not real. It is control. It is the loss of everything that makes them human. With tears in her eyes, but strength in her heart, she refuses. Instead of focusing on the entity, Gemma turns entirely toward her daughter. She speaks softly but firmly, reminding her of their life, their memories, their bond, the small, human moments that no supernatural force can truly replicate. These words begin to break through the entity's control once again. The child trembles, her expression shifting rapidly between possession and awareness, as if she is fighting from within, but the entity reacts instantly. The surrounding shadows surge forward, attempting to pull them apart. The ground cracks open beneath them, revealing an endless void that threatens to swallow everything. The pressure becomes unbearable, and for a moment, it feels as though the entire world is collapsing inward. Yet Gemma refuses to let go. Her grip tightens, not just physically, but emotionally. She anchors her daughter to reality through sheer will and love. It is at this moment that Gemma remembers the choice she was given in the deeper realm, the choice to either become part of the system or sever her connection completely. She finally understands what must be done. The entity's power exists because of her ability to act as a bridge. If that bridge is destroyed, the connection between worlds will collapse, but it will come at a cost. Gemma realizes that she cannot simply close the door. She must become the barrier itself. This means sacrificing her connection, her ability, and possibly her existence within both worlds. It is a decision that no one should ever have to make. But as a mother, she knows there is no alternative. With quiet determination, she pulls her daughter closer and whispers a final reassurance. It's going to be okay. The child, now partially free from the entity's control, looks at her with fear and confusion, but also trust. Then Gemma acts. She focuses all her energy inward, drawing upon her connection to the further and forcing it to collapse back into herself. The effect is immediate and violent. The environment begins to implode, the shadows pulling away from the real world and being dragged back into the darkness. The entity lets out a terrifying, distorted roar as its form begins to destabilize. Unable to maintain its presence without the open bridge, the struggle is intense. The entity fights back, trying to hold on to the connection, trying to reclaim control over the child. But Gemma's will proves stronger. The more she pulls, the weaker the entity becomes, its massive form breaking apart into fragments of shadow and sound. At the same time, the house around them begins to shift back toward reality. The decayed walls flicker, restoring themselves piece by piece. The endless darkness starts to recede, replaced by the faint light of the real world. The process is chaotic and unstable, but it is working. The merging of worlds is being undone. However, the cost becomes clear. As the connection collapses, Gemma begins to fade. Her physical form flickers just like the environment around her, becoming less solid with each passing moment. She realizes that she cannot return with her daughter. The energy required to close the bridge is consuming her completely. The child notices this and begins to panic, crying out and trying to hold on to her. But Gemma gently pulls away, her expression calm despite the pain. She reassures her daughter one last time, telling her to be strong and to remember that she is loved. In a final emotional moment, the connection between them breaks, not in love, but in presence. With one last surge of energy, Gemma completes the collapse of the bridge. The entity is fully dragged back into the further, its final roar echoing into silence as the door slams shut. The shadows vanish, the darkness lifts, and the world is restored. The child falls to the ground as the environment stabilizes completely. The house is back to normal. The air is still, and the terrifying presence is gone. But Gemma is gone too. In a quiet, haunting aftermath, the battle is over. The invasion has been stopped. But the victory comes with a heartbreaking loss. The world has been saved, but at the cost of the one person who made it possible. And yet, as the camera lingers on the now silent house, there is one final, subtle detail, a faint shadow in the corner that disappears just a moment too late, suggesting that even though the door has been closed, something may still remain. The story of Insidious, Out of the Further, enters its final and most haunting phase, where the immediate horror has ended, but the emotional and psychological aftermath begins to unfold. The house is quiet now, completely, still in a way that feels almost unnatural after everything that has happened. The darkness is gone, the shadows no longer move, and the air feels lighter, as if a massive weight has been lifted. But the silence carries a different kind of fear. One that comes not from what is present, but from what has been lost. Gemma's daughter slowly regains consciousness, waking up on the floor of the living room. At first, she is disoriented, confused by the sudden calm. The last thing she remembers is the overwhelming darkness, the presence controlling her, and her mother holding her hand. She looks around, calling out softly, expecting an answer, but none comes. The realization begins to sink in gradually, not as a sudden shock, but as a quiet, painful understanding. Her mother is gone. The film takes its time in this moment, allowing the emotion to settle deeply. The child moves through the house, checking each room, hoping to find some sign that Gemma is still there. Everything appears normal, too normal. The walls are intact, the furniture is in place, and there are no visible signs of the chaos that once consumed the space. It is as if the entire nightmare has been erased, leaving behind only memories. But those memories are enough. As the child sits alone, surrounded by the silence, she begins to recall everything that happened. The whispers, the shadows, the entity, and most importantly, her mother's final act. This emotional weight becomes the core of the ending, shifting the focus from horror to loss and resilience. The fear may be gone, but the impact remains. Days pass, and the outside world begins to return to normal as well. The strange disturbances in the neighborhood stop completely. People who had experienced unusual events struggled to explain what they saw, often dismissing it as confusion or imagination. Authorities find no evidence of anything supernatural, and life slowly resumes its usual rhythm. To everyone else, nothing truly happened, but for Gemma's daughter, everything has changed. She is eventually taken in by relatives, leaving behind the house that holds both her happiest and most terrifying memories. As she prepares to leave, she takes one last look at the place where everything unfolded. There is a sense of closure, but also a lingering unease, as if the house still holds secrets that cannot be fully understood. Before leaving, she notices something small but meaningful. One of her old drawings, partially hidden under a piece of furniture. It is different from the others. Instead of depicting the dark entity or the open door, this one shows a figure standing between two worlds, holding back the darkness. The figure is clearly her mother. This moment serves as a quiet confirmation that Gemma's sacrifice was not in vain. She did not simply disappear, she became something more. A barrier that protects both worlds from collapsing again. However, the film does not end on complete certainty. In the final sequence, we see the child adjusting to her new life. She tries to move forward, to find normalcy again. But small details suggest that her connection to the further may not be entirely gone. She occasionally pauses, as if hearing something faint. Reflections in mirrors seem slightly delayed. Shadows linger just a moment longer than they should. These subtle hints build toward the film's final scene. One night, as she lies in bed, the room is calm and quiet. The camera slowly moves across the space, showing nothing out of the ordinary. But then, just for a brief second, the lighting shifts. A faint distortion appears in the corner of the room, barely noticeable, but enough to suggest that something is still there. The child sits up, sensing it. She looks toward the corner, her expression not filled with fear, but with cautious awareness. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, a soft, almost comforting presence can be felt, not threatening, not dark, but familiar. It is unclear whether this is a remnant of the further or something else. The ambiguity of this moment is intentional. It leaves the audience questioning whether the connection between worlds has truly been severed, or if it still exists in a different form. Perhaps Gemma's sacrifice did not completely close the door, but instead changed the nature of the connection, transforming it from something destructive into something protective. The final shot lingers on the child's face as she slowly lies back down, her eyes still open, watching the darkness carefully. The faint presence in the corner disappears, leaving the room in silence once again. The screen fades to black, and just before everything ends, a very faint whisper can be heard, so soft that it is almost impossible to understand. But it feels familiar, concludes the story of Insidious. Out of the Further with a perfect balance of closure and lingering mystery. The immediate threat has been stopped. The characters have paid the price, and the world has been saved, but the nature of the further remains uncertain. Because in this universe, darkness is never truly gone. It only waits. The story of Insidious. Out of the Further reaches its final note, not with loud horror, but with a quiet, lingering unease that suggests the nightmare may never truly end. After the emotional aftermath of Gemma's sacrifice and the apparent restoration of balance between worlds, life seems to slowly settle back into normalcy, but beneath that calm surface, something subtle continues to exist, something that refuses to fully disappear. Weeks pass, and the world outside carries on as if nothing ever happened. News reports fade, strange incidents are forgotten, and the idea of the further becomes just another unexplainable mystery buried under everyday life. For most people, reality has restabilized completely. The line between the living world and the supernatural appears to be restored, but the film carefully reminds us that appears does not always mean is. Gemma's daughter, now living in a quieter environment away from the old house, adapts to her new life. She goes to school, interacts with others, and tries to rebuild a sense of normalcy. On the surface, she seems stronger, calmer, and more grounded. But internally, she carries something that cannot be erased, the memory of what she experienced, and the connection she once had to something far beyond understanding. There are small moments that feel almost insignificant, yet deeply unsettling. A classroom clock stops for just a second longer than it should. A reflection in a window doesn't quite match her movement. A faint whisper echoes when no one is speaking. These moments are subtle, easy to ignore, but they are consistent. They suggest that the boundary between worlds, though repaired, may still be fragile. One evening, as she sits alone drawing, the child begins to sketch without fully realizing what she is creating. When she looks down, she notices that she has drawn a door, tall, dark, and slightly open. This instantly unsettles her, because she does not remember deciding to draw it. The image feels familiar, almost like a memory trying to resurface. But this time, there is something different. In the drawing, the door is not completely open. It is being held shut by a figure standing in front of it. And that figure looks like her mother. This moment introduces a powerful implication that Gemma did not simply disappear, nor was she lost entirely within the further. Instead, she may have become something else entirely. Not a victim, but a guardian. Not trapped, but transformed into a barrier that prevents the darkness from crossing over again. This idea reframes the entire ending. Gemma's sacrifice was not just an act of loss, it was an act of transformation. She has become part of the boundary itself, existing somewhere between worlds, holding the door closed from the other side. As the film moves toward its final sequence, the atmosphere becomes increasingly quiet and reflective. The horror elements take a step back, allowing the emotional weight of the story to settle. But just when everything feels resolved, the film introduces one final moment that changes the tone completely. Late at night, the child wakes up suddenly. There is no loud noise, no clear disturbance, just a feeling. The same feeling she had when the further first began to reach out to her. She sits up slowly, looking around her room. Everything appears normal at first glance, but there is a subtle shift in the air, something almost impossible to describe. Then she notices it. In the far corner of the room, where the light barely reaches, there is a faint outline, something darker than the surrounding shadows. It does not move, it does not speak, but it is clearly present. The moment stretches, filled with tension, as the child stares at it, trying to understand what she is seeing. For a second, fear begins to rise, but then something unexpected happens. The shadow flickers, and instead of growing stronger or moving closer, it fades slightly, as if being pushed back by an unseen force. This is the final confirmation. Whatever remains of the further is being held back, and whatever Gemma has become is still fighting. The child watches as the shadow disappears completely, leaving the room in silence once again. But this silence feels different from before. Not empty, not unnatural, but protective, as if something is watching over her, not to harm, but to guard. She slowly lies back down, her eyes still fixed on the corner for a moment longer, before finally closing them. There is no fear left in her expression, only a quiet understanding that while the darkness may still exist, it is no longer in control. The film ends with one final, powerful visual. The camera slowly pulls away from the house, moving upward into the night sky. For a brief moment, the darkness seems endless, stretching infinitely beyond what we can see. But then, faintly, almost imperceptibly, a soft glow appears, like a barrier separating two vast spaces. Behind that barrier, something moves. Not aggressively, not violently, but patiently, waiting. The screen fades to black, and just as the credits begin to roll, a final sound is heard, a distant echo, not of fear, but of something watching, something aware. It is not clear whether this is a warning or a reassurance. But one thing is certain, the door to the further is never truly gone. It is only held shut. The story of Insidious, Out of the Further, closes on a deeply haunting and emotional note, where the horror is no longer loud or violent, but quiet, lingering, and unforgettable. After everything that has happened, the collapse of worlds, the terrifying confrontation with the entity, and Gemma's ultimate sacrifice, the film slows down, allowing the audience to fully absorb the weight of what remains. This final part is not about fear in the traditional sense, but about presence, memory, and the unsettling realization that some connections can never truly be erased. Time moves forward, but not in a way that completely heals. Gemma's daughter continues her life, adjusting step by step to a reality that feels normal on the surface, but is forever changed beneath. She smiles, speaks, and interacts like any other child, but there is a quiet depth in her eyes now, a kind of awareness that no one else around her seems to understand. It is the awareness of someone who has seen beyond the veil, someone who has felt the existence of something larger and darker than the human world. Her new home is safe, calm, and filled with light, intentionally far from anything that could remind her of the past. Yet, even in this space, subtle disturbances continue to occur. They are not violent or threatening like before, but they are unmistakable. A door creaks open slightly on its own. A curtain moves even when there is no wind. A faint sound echoes in empty rooms. These moments are small, almost harmless, but they serve as quiet reminders that the boundary between worlds, though restored, is still fragile. One evening, as she sits alone in her room, she begins to draw again. Drawing has always been her way of expressing what she cannot fully explain, and now it becomes even more important. Without thinking too much, her hand moves across the page, creating shapes and forms that feel familiar yet distant. When she finally stops and looks at what she has drawn, she freezes. It is the door again, tall, dark, slightly open. But this time, the image is more detailed than ever before. The space behind the door is not empty, it is filled with shadows, moving faintly as if alive. And standing in front of it, holding it shut, is the same figure she has drawn before, her mother. This drawing is different from the others because it does not feel like a memory. It feels like a message, a confirmation that Gemma's presence still exists somewhere, not as a ghost or a lost soul, but as something stronger, something purposeful. She has become a guardian, a barrier between worlds, holding back the darkness from crossing over again. This realization brings both comfort and sadness. Comfort because it means her mother is not completely gone. Sadness because it also means she may never return. As the night deepens, the atmosphere shifts subtly. The house remains quiet, but there is a faint tension in the air. Something almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. The child senses it immediately. She pauses, looking around her room slowly, her instincts telling her that something is not quite right. Then she hears it, a whisper. Soft, distant, almost impossible to understand. At first, she thinks it might be her imagination. But then it comes again, slightly clearer this time. carrying a tone that feels strangely familiar. It is not threatening, not aggressive, but it carries a weight that makes her heart race. She slowly stands up, her eyes moving toward the corner of the room, the same corner where she once saw the faint shadow before. For a moment, nothing is there. The darkness sits still, ordinary and quiet. But then, very slowly, it changes. A faint outline begins to form, barely visible against the dim light. It does not take shape completely, nor does it move forward. It simply exists, watching. The child's breathing becomes heavier, but she does not step back. Instead, she watches it carefully, trying to understand what it is. And then something unexpected happens. The presence does not grow stronger. It weakens, almost as if something is pushing it away. The shadow flickers, struggling to maintain its form, and for a brief second, another shape appears behind it, a softer, brighter presence that contrasts sharply with the darkness. It is not fully visible, not clear enough to confirm, but it carries a feeling that is unmistakable: protection. The shadow retreats, dissolving back into nothingness, leaving the corner empty once again. The tension in the room fades, replaced by a calm stillness that feels safe rather than eerie. The child stands there for a moment longer, her expression slowly softening. She does not fully understand what she just witnessed, but deep inside, she feels something important. She is not alone. Somewhere beyond what she can see, her mother is still there, still holding the door, still fighting to keep the darkness away. She returns to her bed, lying down quietly, her eyes lingering on the ceiling as the silence settles around her. This time, the silence feels different. It is not empty, not filled with hidden threats, but peaceful, almost protective. But the film is not finished yet. As the camera slowly moves away from her room, it drifts through the house, passing by empty hallways and quiet spaces, before finally reaching the outside. The night sky stretches endlessly above, dark and vast, carrying a sense of mystery that mirrors the further itself. For a brief moment, everything is still, and then, almost imperceptibly, a faint ripple appears in the darkness, like a disturbance just beneath the surface of reality. It does not grow, it does not spread, but it exists, quietly reminding us that what lies beyond is never truly gone. The final seconds of the film return to the image of the door, not the physical door in the house, but the one from the drawings, the symbolic doorway between worlds. It stands closed, held firmly in place. There is no movement, no sound, no sign of anything trying to break through. But just before the screen fades to black, there is a single soft sound. A whisper. This time it is clearer than before. Not threatening, not distorted, but gentle and familiar. It is impossible to say for certain what it means. It could be a warning, a reminder, or even a reassurance. But it leaves the audience with one final thought. The darkness of the further may never truly disappear, but as long as someone stands between it and the world, there is hope. The screen fades to black, and the credits begin to roll, leaving behind a lingering sense of mystery, emotion, and quiet fear. The story ends not with a final answer, but with a feeling, one that stays with the audience long after the film is over. Because in the world of Insidious, the door is never truly gone. It is only kept closed by those willing to sacrifice everything. The upcoming horror film Insidious, out of the further, attempts to expand the already established universe of the Insidious franchise in a bold and ambitious direction. From the very beginning, the film makes it clear that it is not just another haunted house story. It is trying to evolve the mythology of the further into something much larger, more complex, and far more dangerous. Unlike earlier installments that focused on possession and astral projection, this film introduces a concept that significantly raises the stakes. The idea that the boundary between the human world and the further can be permanently. One of the film's strongest aspects is its atmosphere. Instead of relying heavily on jump scares, it builds a slow, suffocating tension that stays with the viewer throughout. The horror here feels psychological and existential rather than purely visual. There's a constant sense that something is wrong, even in calm moments. and this unease becomes the backbone of the film's identity. The use of silence, shadows, and distorted environments creates a deeply immersive experience that aligns well with the tone established in previous Insidious films while still pushing it forward. The concept and premise are arguably the most compelling elements of the film. The idea of a character who can not only enter the further, but also bring entities back into the real world is a natural evolution of the franchise's lore. It adds a new layer of danger and unpredictability, making the threat feel much more global rather than isolated to a single family. This shift from personal horror to potential large-scale supernatural collapse gives the story a sense of urgency and scale that previous films only hinted at. However, this ambition is also where the film faces its first challenge. Expanding the mythology of the further to such an extent risks making the narrative feel overly complex or abstract for some viewers. While longtime fans may appreciate the deeper exploration, casual audiences might find it harder to follow the rules and logic of this expanded universe. The film walks a fine line between being mysterious and being confusing, and at times it leans slightly toward the latter. The tone of the film is noticeably darker and more serious compared to earlier entries. There is less humor and fewer light moments, which makes the emotional stakes feel heavier. The story focuses heavily on themes of motherhood, sacrifice, and the consequences of power. This emotional core helps ground the supernatural elements, giving the audience something relatable to connect with even when the plot ventures into more abstract territory. Visually, the film appears to take a more cinematic and stylized approach. The depiction of the further is expanded significantly, transforming it from a simple dark dimension into a vast, ever-changing environment shaped by memory and emotion. This creative decision adds depth to the world building and makes the horror feel more imaginative. However, it also requires strong visual execution. If not handled properly, it could risk feeling repetitive or overly CGI-heavy. The pacing in the first half of the film is deliberately slow, focusing on building tension and establishing the rules of the story. This may not appeal to viewers who prefer fast-paced horror, but it works well for creating a sense of dread. The gradual escalation of supernatural events allows the audience to fully absorb the atmosphere before the story transitions into more intense and chaotic sequences. Another important aspect is the film's connection to the franchise legacy, particularly through the presence of Lin Shaye's iconic character, Elise Rainier. Even if her role is limited or symbolic, her influence is deeply felt throughout the story. This connection helps maintain continuity and gives longtime fans a sense of familiarity within an otherwise evolving narrative. Overall, the first impression of the film is that it is ambitious, atmospheric, and emotionally driven, but also slightly risky in how far it pushes the boundaries of the established formula. It is not trying to repeat what worked before. Instead, it is attempting to redefine what an Insidious film can be. The narrative structure of Insidious, Out of the Further, is where the film takes its biggest creative risks, attempting to balance a deeply personal story with an expansive supernatural mythology. At its core, the screenplay is built around a simple emotional premise, a mother trying to protect her child, but it layers this foundation with increasingly complex ideas about alternate dimensions, psychological trauma, and the fragile boundary between life and death. This dual approach is both the film's greatest strength and its most noticeable challenge. From a structural standpoint, the film follows a 3-act progression, but it is presented in a way that feels more fluid and immersive rather than traditionally segmented. The first act focuses on establishing Gemma's world, her connection to her childhood home, and the early signs of supernatural disturbance. What stands out here is the screenplay's commitment to slow burn storytelling. Instead of rushing into major horror sequences, it takes time to build a sense of unease through subtle details, unexplained sounds, small visual distortions, and behavioral changes in the characters. This approach allows the audience to gradually sink into the film's atmosphere, making the later escalation feel more impactful. The second act is where the story begins to expand significantly. This is where the concept of the further is explored in much greater depth than in previous installments. The screenplay introduces the idea that the further is not just a single location, but a network of interconnected spaces shaped by human memory and emotion. This is an ambitious piece of world building, and it adds a new layer of complexity to the narrative. It transforms the horror from something external into something deeply internal, suggesting that the true source of fear lies within the characters themselves. However, this expansion also creates a challenge in terms of clarity. The rules governing the further are not always clearly defined, and the film often relies on visual, storytelling, and implication rather than direct explanation. While this ambiguity can be effective in maintaining a sense of mystery, it may also leave some viewers feeling disoriented. The screenplay occasionally assumes that the audience is already familiar with the franchise's lore, which could make it less accessible for newcomers. One of the most interesting aspects of the screenplay is its focus on the concept of a bridge between worlds. Gemma's ability to not only enter the further but also bring entities back into the real world is a significant evolution of the franchise's mythology. This idea introduces a new level of danger, as it shifts the stakes from isolated hauntings to the possibility of a widespread supernatural invasion. The screenplay uses this concept effectively to build tension, constantly reminding the audience that every action has consequences that extend beyond the immediate situation. The character-driven nature of the story is another strong point. Despite the complex mythology, the screenplay consistently returns to the emotional core of the narrative. Gemma's relationship with her daughter. This relationship serves as the anchor for the entire film, providing a sense of purpose and urgency that keeps the story grounded. The dialogue between the characters is often minimal, but it is used effectively to convey emotion and build tension. Silence plays a significant role here, allowing the performances and atmosphere to carry much of the storytelling. At the same time, the screenplay explores deeper themes such as trauma, memory, and inherited fear. The idea that Gemma's connection to the further stems from her childhood experiences adds a psychological dimension to the story. It suggests that the horrors she faces are not entirely external, but are also linked to her past. This thematic layer gives the film a sense of depth that goes beyond typical horror conventions, making it more than just a series of scares. The third act of the film is where the narrative becomes more intense and action-driven, but it still maintains a strong emotional focus. The confrontation with the entity is not just a physical battle, but a psychological and emotional one. The screenplay emphasizes the idea that fear is not something to be fought with force, but something to be understood and overcome. This approach sets the film apart from more conventional horror stories, which often rely on direct confrontation and resolution. One of the standout elements of the screenplay is its use of visual storytelling. Many of the film's most important moments are conveyed through imagery rather than dialogue. The depiction of the further, with its shifting environments and distorted spaces, serves as a reflection of the characters' inner states. This visual approach allows the film to communicate complex ideas in a way that feels organic and immersive, rather than overly explanatory. However, this reliance on visual storytelling can also be a double-edged sword. While it enhances the film's atmosphere and thematic depth, it may also make certain plot points harder to follow. Some viewers may find themselves struggling to piece together the narrative, especially during the more abstract sequences. The screenplay occasionally prioritizes mood and symbolism over clarity, which can be both a strength and a weakness depending on the audience's perspective. Another aspect worth discussing is the film's pacing within the narrative structure. The first half is deliberately slow, focusing on character development and atmosphere, while the second half becomes increasingly fast-paced and chaotic. This contrast creates a strong sense of escalation, but it can also feel slightly uneven. Some viewers may feel that the story takes too long to build momentum, while others may feel that the climax happens too quickly after such a gradual setup. The screenplay also attempts to balance fan service with originality. References to previous films and the inclusion of familiar elements help maintain continuity within the franchise. At the same time, the introduction of new concepts and ideas ensures that the film does not feel repetitive. This balance is handled fairly well, although there are moments where the callbacks may feel more like nostalgia than necessity. The dialogue itself is relatively restrained, often serving to support the atmosphere rather than drive the plot. Characters rarely explain what is happening in a direct or detailed manner, which adds to the film's sense of realism and tension. However, this minimalistic approach also means that certain aspects of the story are left open to interpretation, which may not appeal to all viewers. In terms of narrative cohesion, the film does a commendable job of tying together its various elements by the end. The themes of sacrifice, connection, and the consequences of power are all brought to a satisfying conclusion, even if some of the finer details remain ausbuscht. The ending in particular leans more toward emotional resolution than logical explanation, which aligns with the film's overall tone. Overall, the story and screenplay of Insidious Out of the Further are ambitious and thought-provoking, offering a fresh take on the franchise while staying true to its core themes. It is a film that prioritizes atmosphere, emotion, and thematic depth over straightforward storytelling, which makes it both engaging and, at times, challenging to follow. It may not provide all the answers, but it leaves a lasting impression, one that continues to linger long after the film has ended. The performances in Insidious Out of the Further play a crucial role in grounding its highly abstract and supernatural narrative. While the film leans heavily into psychological horror and complex world-building, it is ultimately the cast that makes the story feel human, emotional, and believable. Without strong performances, the film's ambitious ideas could easily feel distant or disconnected, but fortunately, the actors bring enough depth and authenticity to keep the audience invested. At the center of the film is Gemma, portrayed by Amelia Eve, and her performance is arguably the backbone of the entire story. She delivers a layered and emotionally intense portrayal of a mother caught between fear and determination. What stands out most about her acting is the subtlety. She doesn't rely on exaggerated reactions or over-the-top expressions. Instead, her fear feels internal, controlled, and gradually escalating. This approach fits perfectly with the film's slow-burn tone. As the story progresses, her performance shifts from confusion and vulnerability to strength and resolve, making her character arc feel natural and compelling. In the later parts of the film, especially during the confrontations within the Further, she carries a strong emotional weight that elevates the stakes beyond simple horror. The portrayal of her daughter is equally important, even though it is more understated. The child actor brings a quiet innocence to the role, which makes the gradual shift into something darker far more disturbing. The transformation from a normal child into someone influenced and eventually controlled by supernatural forces is handled with impressive restraint. Instead of dramatic changes, the performance relies on small details, a slight change in tone, a longer pause before speaking, or an unsettling stillness in body language. These subtle shifts create a deeply unsettling effect, making the possession feel more realistic and psychologically disturbing. Another key performance comes from Brandon Perea, whose role adds a different dynamic to the story. His character provides a more grounded perspective, often acting as a bridge between the audience and the increasingly complex supernatural elements. He brings a sense of realism and relatability, reacting to the events in a way that feels natural rather than scripted. His performance helps balance the film, preventing it from becoming too abstract or detached. While his role may not be as emotionally intense as Gemma's, it is essential in maintaining narrative clarity and providing moments of stability within the chaos. Maisie Richardson-Sellers also delivers a strong supporting performance, contributing to the film's emotional and narrative depth. Her character adds another layer to the story, offering insight into the broader implications of the Further and its influence. Her performance is confident and composed, providing a contrast to the more emotionally driven roles. She brings a sense of intelligence and awareness to the film, helping to explore its themes in a more grounded and thoughtful way. One of the most significant presences in the film even if not physically dominant, is Lin Shaye as Elise Rainier. Her legacy within the Insidious franchise is undeniable, and even a limited or symbolic appearance carries emotional weight. The film uses her presence carefully, not relying too heavily on nostalgia, but still acknowledging her importance. Her character represents knowledge, experience, and a connection to the past, and her inclusion adds a sense of continuity that longtime fans will appreciate. Even in brief moments, she brings a sense of authority and calm that contrasts with the chaos surrounding the other characters. From a performance standpoint, one of the film's biggest strengths is how well the cast adapts to its atmosphere-driven storytelling. Because the film often relies on silence, visual cues, and minimal dialogue, the actors must convey emotion through expression and body language rather than words. This is particularly evident in scenes set within the further, where dialogue is sparse and the environment itself becomes a character. The cast manages this challenge effectively, maintaining emotional clarity even when the narrative becomes more abstract. Another notable aspect is the chemistry between the characters, especially between Gemma and her daughter. Their relationship feels genuine and emotionally grounded, which is essential for the film's central theme of sacrifice. The bond between them is not just told, it is shown through small interactions, shared moments, and emotional reactions. This authenticity makes the stakes feel real, ensuring that the audience remains invested in their journey. However, the performances are not without minor limitations. Due to the film's heavy focus on atmosphere and concept, some supporting characters may feel slightly underdeveloped. While the main cast delivers strong performances, certain secondary roles do not receive enough screen time or depth to leave a lasting impression. This is not necessarily a flaw in the acting itself, but rather a result of the screenplay prioritizing mood and central themes over character expansion. Additionally, the film's abstract nature sometimes limits the actors' ability to fully express their characters in a traditional sense. In some scenes, especially those involving complex supernatural elements, the performances rely heavily on interpretation rather than clear emotional beats. While this works well for maintaining mystery, it may leave some viewers wanting more direct character development. Despite these minor issues, the overall quality of acting in Insidious Out of the Further remains strong and consistent. The cast successfully anchors the film's ambitious narrative, ensuring that the story never loses its emotional core. Their performances transform what could have been a purely conceptual horror film into something deeply human and relatable. In the end, the acting is one of the film's most reliable strengths. It provides the emotional foundation that supports the complex story, making the horror feel personal rather than distant. Without these performances, the film avoids overloading the audience with constant visual effects or exaggerated horror sequences. Instead, it carefully chooses when to reveal its most intense moments, making them more impactful. This restraint extends to the portrayal of the entities themselves. Rather than showing them in full detail at all times, the film often keeps them partially hidden, allowing the imagination to fill in the gaps. This technique enhances the psychological aspect of the horror, making it more effective than explicit visuals alone. The direction also demonstrates a clear understanding of emotional storytelling. Despite the complex and abstract nature of the plot, the film never loses sight of its emotional core. The relationship between Gemma and her daughter is given significant attention, with the camera often focusing on small, intimate moments that highlight their bond. These moments provide a necessary contrast to the larger, more chaotic sequences, ensuring that the audience remains emotionally invested. However, the film's ambitious direction is not without its challenges. At times, the emphasis on atmosphere and visual symbolism can make the narrative feel overly abstract. Certain sequences, particularly those set deep within the further, prioritize mood and imagery over clear storytelling. While this can be artistically effective, it may also lead to confusion for some viewers. The balance between clarity and ambiguity is delicate, and the film occasionally leans too far toward the latter. Pacing is another area where the direction may divide audiences. The deliberate, slow build-up in the first half creates a strong sense of tension, but it may also feel uneven when compared to the more intense and fast-paced second half. The transition between these two styles is not always seamless, which can affect the overall flow of the film. Some viewers may feel that the story takes too long to reach its central conflict, while others may appreciate the gradual escalation. The director's approach to sound and silence is also worth noting. Moments of complete silence are used strategically to heighten tension, often making the audience more aware of subtle sounds and movements. This contrasts with the more chaotic sequences, where sound becomes overwhelming and disorienting. The interplay between silence and noise adds another layer to the film's atmosphere, making it more immersive. In terms of innovation, Jacob Chase's direction stands out for its willingness to push the boundaries of the franchise. Rather than repeating familiar patterns, the film introduces new ideas and explores them in a visually and thematically ambitious way. This willingness to take risks is commendable, even if it does not always result in perfect execution. It shows a desire to evolve the series rather than simply maintain it. Overall, the direction of Insidious Out of the Further is bold, atmospheric, and visually driven. It prioritizes mood, emotion, and thematic depth over conventional storytelling, creating a unique and immersive experience. While this approach may not resonate with every viewer, it undeniably gives the film a distinct identity within the horror genre. In the end, the direction succeeds in transforming the film into more than just a typical horror entry. It becomes a cinematic exploration of fear, memory, and the fragile boundary between worlds. One of the most striking aspects of Insidious Out of the Further lies in its visual presentation, where cinematography, visual effects, and production design come together to create a haunting and immersive experience. The film clearly understands that in modern horror, atmosphere is not built by story alone. It is crafted through what the audience sees, how they see it, and how long those images stay in their mind. This installment leans heavily into visual storytelling, using every frame to reinforce its themes of distortion, fear, and the collapse of reality. The cinematography plays a crucial role in shaping the film's tone. The camera work is deliberately controlled and often slow, allowing scenes to unfold with a creeping sense of tension. Instead of quick cuts or chaotic movement, the film frequently uses long, steady shots that make the audience feel trapped within the environment. This technique builds discomfort, as viewers are forced to stay in unsettling moments rather than escape them. The framing is also carefully designed, often placing characters in off-center positions or leaving large, empty spaces within the shot, spaces that feel like they could be filled by something at any moment. Lighting is used with precision to enhance the horror. The film relies heavily on low-key lighting, with deep shadows dominating most scenes. Rather than fully revealing what is happening, the cinematography often obscures details, forcing the audience to focus on shapes and movement rather than clear images. This creates a constant sense of uncertainty, where even familiar environments feel threatening. In scenes set within the Further, the lighting becomes even more abstract, using unnatural tones and contrasts to create a world that feels disconnected from reality. The depiction of the Further itself is one of the film's most ambitious visual achievements. Unlike earlier entries in the franchise, which presented it as a relatively simple, dark dimension, this film expands it into a vast, ever-changing landscape. The environments shift between distorted versions of real-world locations and entirely surreal spaces, reflecting the idea that the Further is shaped by memory and emotion. This creative decision adds depth to the world-building, making the supernatural elements feel more dynamic and unpredictable. However, this level of ambition also places a heavy reliance on visual effects. The film uses a combination of practical effects and CGI to bring its vision to life. In many cases, this blend works effectively, especially when the effects are subtle and integrated into the environment. Small details, such as shadows moving independently, reflections behaving unnaturally, or objects distorting slightly, are often more effective than large-scale visual sequences. These understated effects enhance the realism of the horror, making it feel more immediate and believable. That said, there are moments where the film leans more heavily into CGI, particularly during the more intense sequences in the further. While these scenes are visually impressive, they can sometimes feel slightly overwhelming, or less grounded compared to the quieter moments. The challenge here is maintaining a balance between spectacle and subtlety. When the film focuses on atmosphere and suggestion, the visuals are at their strongest. When it becomes more reliant on large-scale effects, it risks losing some of its psychological impact. The production design is another area where the film excels. The transformation of the house from a normal, lived-in space into a distorted, nightmarish environment is handled with great attention to detail. As the story progresses, the changes become more pronounced. Walls decay, textures shift, and familiar objects take on unsettling forms. These gradual alterations reinforce the idea that reality itself is breaking down, making the setting feel like a living, evolving entity. In the further, the production design becomes even more experimental. The spaces are not bound by traditional logic, allowing for creative and often surreal designs. Endless corridors, fragmented rooms, and impossible architectures create a sense of disorientation that mirrors the characters' experiences. So that was our full breakdown and detailed review of Insidious Out of the Further. This film takes the Insidious universe to a whole new level, expanding the concept of the further in a much deeper and darker way. From its emotional story about a mother's sacrifice to its intense psychological horror, the movie gives us a mix of fear, mystery, and strong emotional moments. While the film is slow in parts and a bit complex in its storytelling, it still manages to deliver a unique and haunting experience that stays with you even after it ends. If you are a fan of the Insidious franchise or you enjoy atmospheric and psychological horror, then this movie is definitely worth watching. But if you prefer fast-paced horror with constant jump scares, this film might feel a little slow for you. Now I'd love to hear from you. What do you think about this movie? Did you like the story, or did it feel confusing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Icy movie explanations and reviews. See you in the next video.